Alright, it's time for some weekly news, but first I want to thank all of these superstars, because all of you are the reason I can keep making these videos. Now let's get on to the current events first, as you only have 2 more days to finish the Return to Living World Season 4 bonus event, which is definitely worth doing as you'll get a ton of Season 4 map currency, which I'll talk about later in the video, as well as some mystic coins and a free skin. This upcoming week we don't have any new events planned, but Tuesday 15 it'll be the most wonderful time of the year as we can no-life grind Mad King's Lab once more. If you don't own a candy corn gobbler just yet, I recommend you focus this week on farming some gold to convert to gems, as I do believe that it's one of, if not the best item to own. At most, you'll need about 125 gold for 300 gems, but more often than not, the pack is sold at a discount for 240 gems or about 100 gold. Now let's get back to the current event, because I mentioned getting a ton of Season 4 map currency, which can be consumed for Volatile Magic and traded in for Trophy Shipments. Usually this trade should net you around 1 gold of profit, but as you can see, that number dropped significantly this past week. That's because a lot of people are doing this right now, massively increasing the supply of most of the tier 6 materials. Things are already somewhat settling down as we're nearing the end of this event, but for now, I'd say it's still fine to get those trophy shipments, but I definitely recommend not selling your materials just yet and wait for prices to recover. In addition to tier 6 materials, these trophy shipments will also give you a ton of tier 5, most of which have also taken a rather significant hit. Some of them, like the Venom Sacks, actually remain stable when it comes to their supply and demand, but their price still dropped 25% regardless. This means that there could be a gold making opportunity for people with liquid gold and a bit of patience. Because of all of these price drops, material upgrade profits don't look attractive at all. But what you could do is stock up on tier 5 materials right now and then later convert them to tier 6 and list them once things are back to normal. It might take a bit longer for this to happen because of the Halloween event though. Typically, Halloween doesn't require that many tier 6 materials, except maybe for the people who want to craft Night Fury, but those will be rather limited. Instead, it all depends on how many trick or treat bags will get farmed, because tier 6 materials do drop from those, albeit only rarely. The one exception to all of this will be bones, as the Mad King's Lab is populated with skeletons who aptly drop them and therefore will probably cause a bit of an oversupply. Night Fury is near its highest price in this past year, by the way, so crafting one now, hoping to make a profit during Halloween, seems to be out of the question. And that's before even taking its volume, which is almost non-existent, into account. I'd even argue the margins for flipping the item are too thin once you take taxes into account. Now, if you would like to try your hand at speculating on some Halloween items, then I would definitely recommend keeping track of the different infusions during the event. Quite often you'll be able to get a couple of buy orders filled, which you can then relist later for profit. Now, Volatile Magic isn't the only thing the current event is good for, as you can get 3 mystic coins per day from the daily achievements, as well as 5 more for the meta achievement. This seemingly wasn't enough to move the needle though, as mystic coin prices remained relatively stable, give or take maybe a 5% fluctuation. So I guess the next time we might see some cheaper ones will be during the next vault refresh in 43 days. Ectos, on the other hand, slowly continued their downward trajectory and have been moving even closer to that 30 silver price point. Biggest reason is probably their supply increasing while the demand remained stable. One of the best sources to get these is still Unidentified Gear, which just like last week has been going through a bit of a roller coaster. It's relatively rare for their supply to overtake demand, but this has now happened for all 3 rarities. Greens saw the biggest shock, as their supply increased by about 40% or about 500,000 pieces. The current event is probably one of the culprits, as it sees us completing much more metas, and the ones like Palawadan or Dragonfall tend to reward players with a lot of these. All of these materials becoming cheaper also means cheaper legendary weapon crafting. Despite this, most of them actually retained their price. There's maybe a couple of exceptions, but those seem to be more opportunistic undercuts rather than a full-on trend. What is fairly interesting is that a lot of the Janthir Wilds materials get more and more in demand the more time passes. While the weekly graphs might not always show this clearly, the monthly ones definitely do. This hasn't been enough for a massive price movement, but the longer they remain in demand, the better it'll probably be for the people farming these. And depending on whether ArenaNet releases a bunch of new homestead decorations for Halloween or not, we could potentially already see a bit of a price hike. For this to happen, I would assume that A, there needs to be more than 1 or 2 decorations released, and B, that they all require a good amount of the Janthir Wilds materials. If either doesn't happen, then the next big possible prize event will most likely be the next content release. Mursaat Runestone demand is also still on the rise, by the way. Maybe a bit less than last week's 20% increase, but it's still almost a 10% increase over this past week. The supply on the other hand hasn't been following suit and is still stuck around 12k. To put it into perspective once more, 12k will be enough for about 50 legendary spears if they require 250 runestones, or 120 if they only require 100. Whichever it is, that is not a lot, especially if you consider that a large part of that supply is locked at 2 gold or more. For me, that means that they're still worth holding on to, as I can easily see them break the 1 gold mark, if not 1.5, once we can start using them. Lately, I've also been trying to throw in one fun bonus way to make some extra gold in the game, and this week I want to revisit Mystic Forging Minis, which I talked about before in one of my older guides. Since that video, there are a few caveats that need to be added though, but if you master these, you could just sit near a trading post and a Mystic Forge and generate a bit of extra spending money. The main pitfalls to avoid are their volume, which is always gonna be low, and their sometimes deceptive crafting costs. If we take a look at the mini Mist Shadow Tigress, for example, you might think that you'll be raking in over 140 gold every time you can forge. We get to this number by taking the instant sales price, subtracting the 15% TP taxes from it, and then taking our crafting costs into account. Efficiency shows a much more attractive number, but for that one, you'll need your order to fill, which isn't that likely to happen. Another problem is that efficiency accounts for you being able to get all of the ingredients at their current buy prices, as most of the crafting costs will far exceed those. This again is unlikely to happen as each of them has such a low sales rate, and this is gonna be the case for a lot of these minis. But every now and then you might stumble upon one where people will be willing to pay a higher price and makes forging them worth it once more. One such example would be the mini black skimmer pup, which is gonna cost you just under 11 gold to craft and can be instantly sold for 15 gold. Taking the TP taxes into account, that's about 1 gold and 75 silver every time you can fill a buy order. Now, as you can see, you can only do this about 4 times before you run out of buyers. And I wouldn't list them because, again, the sales volume is almost non-existent. Now, almost every single mini collection has one like the Black Skimmer Pup, so it becomes a game of identifying those, grabbing the right amount of base minis from the trading post, forging them and then filling those orders. Sometimes you can even get lucky and be the first one to spot those 30 plus gold orders for the Silver Jackal Pups. And while this won't be an infinite gold printing method, it might be worth taking a look at these every now and then. Especially when one of the base minis becomes part of the Blackline chest drops, as people will then tend to dump those on the trading post. For now, I have public crafting lists on my Discord server, but if there's enough interest, I wouldn't mind making a public spreadsheet. This would of course mean that the first to spot the opportunity would always be the only one to profit though. Last week, I also mentioned my Guma skins becoming increasingly more interesting to pick up, as their price has been dropping ever since they've been added to the current Blackline chest rotation, and this is still the case this week. When you finally unlock all 16 skins, you'll get 7 Blackline tickets, which you can trade in either for other skins or Blackline vintage boxes. If you want to recoup your investment, the boxes are still the most attractive option to me, as they're nearly the same price as the Void Corrupted skins, but they trade at much higher volumes. Lastly, we also need to take a look at the Pack Scout Supply mapping materials, and if you missed last week's trade-in, I'd recommend you wait another 2. This week isn't that much worse, but next week will be one of the worst to get rid of your mapping materials. Week 8, on the other hand, will give Destroyer lodestones, which should hopefully be unaffected by whatever pressure Trick or Treat bags might be putting on some of the other tier 6 materials. Anyway, that's it for now. Again, a huge thank you to everyone who's been supporting me. I know I haven't been live in forever, but that's bound to change next week when we can farm the lab together.